Have you ever wondered what happens to all of that energy from a protest after the signs are put away and the crowds go home? Well, today we're looking at this really incredible relationship between the civil rights icon Jesse Jackson and the University UCLA. And it's so much more than just a history of speeches. It's this deep kind of 360-degree connection where activism, academics, and archives all come together in a really powerful way. And that brings us to the big question, right? How does that fiery, in-the-moment energy of a protest actually become a permanent part of an institution's memory? Let's dive in and see how it works. So here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at Jackson the activist, right there on campus. Then we'll see how he made the leap from the protest line to the podium. After that, we'll explore how UCLA created a living archive of his work. And stick around, because we're going to stumble on a pretty surprising case of mistaken identity along the way. Okay, let's start with Jesse Jackson, the activist. For decades, he really used the UCLA campus as this powerful stage. He turned its plazas and its lecture halls into a national forum for some of the biggest debates happening in the country. And you can see just how consistent he was on this timeline. I mean, it starts way back in '69 with his economic justice work. It runs right through his presidential campaigns in the '80s, and all the way to these major battles over things like affirmative action in the '90s and 2000s. He was just this recurring, powerful voice on campus. The mid-'80s, though, were especially intense. Jackson's national fight against apartheid in South Africa was pouring gasoline on the fire of local student action at UCLA. Students literally built shantytowns right there on campus, creating what one person called a cauldron of burning emotion. All of this was to pressure the university to divest from companies doing business with the regime. It was just a raw, powerful, and very visible moment. And Jackson always had this incredible way of framing the debate. During the superheated fight over Proposition 209, that was the one aiming to end affirmative action, he stood in front of a crowd of students and said, "The American dream isn't about exclusion. It's about a big tent, where our diversity is actually our greatest strength." And now, things take this really fascinating turn. The activist who was rallying crowds outside the university's buildings was about to get a formal invitation to come inside to one of its most prestigious stages. The year is 1990, and this year marks a huge turning point in the whole relationship between Jackson and UCLA. This is it. He was invited to give the keynote address at the UCLA School of Law's commencement ceremony. Now think about that. This wasn't a protest, it wasn't a campaign stop. This was the university establishment itself, officially recognizing Jackson as a major legal and moral voice in America. And his message to those new lawyers was just so profound. He talked about the shift from a civil rights movement, which is based on moral appeal, to civil rights law, which is about institutional enforcement. He basically urged the graduates to take that same passion for justice, what he called a messianic yearning, and carry it from the streets directly into the courtrooms and law offices. So, UCLA was the stage for these huge historic moments. But what makes this relationship truly 360 degrees is what the university did next. It started to actively preserve these moments, turning all that action into a lasting memory. And this, well, this is the raw material of history. When you look into UCLA's special collections, you find black and white photos of his early economic activism, you find the actual negatives from his '84 presidential run, and even recorded interviews that document the entire era. But this isn't just about sticking stuff in a box. The Ralph J. Bunche Center for African American Studies is the academic engine driving all of this. They don't just hold the materials, they actively study them. They're turning Jackson's legacy of activism into a subject for serious, rigorous research for whole new generations of students and scholars. But while we're talking about rigorous inquiry, the university's archives revealed this fascinating little detail, a sort of scholarly mix-up that just perfectly highlights why this stuff is so important. It turns out if you search for Jesse Jackson in UCLA's academic databases, you have to be really specific. Because you might be looking for Reverend Jesse Jackson, the civil rights leader of the political Big Tent, but you could just as easily end up with Professor Jesse Jackson, a neurophysiologist from the University of Alberta who studies a tiny part of the brain called the claustrum. It's a pretty crucial distinction for any researcher to make. So this is really the whole point. It's this complete 360-degree loop. It starts with the activism on campus, that leads to formal institutional recognition. That recognition in turn ensures that history is preserved in the archives, and those archives then fuel brand new scholarly study, you see? action becomes memory, and that memory inspires a whole new level of understanding. And this cycle is what makes this connection so special. It guarantees that Jesse Jackson's influence at UCLA isn't just some dusty relic of the past. It's a dynamic, living part of the university's ongoing mission. It's really a model for how confrontation and collaboration can build something that truly lasts. Which leaves us with one final question to chew on. When a powerful institution like a university archives the very dissent that once challenged it, is that an act of honoring the protest? Or is it maybe a way of safely containing it? That's a question worth thinking about.